Hi, and welcome to Co-Teaching as a High Leverage Practice. Let's collaborate. I'm Dr. Wendy Murawski, and I am joined today by my friend and colleague, Amy Gaines, and a special visitor from Simpact Immersive Learning at California State University, Northridge. Let's jump right into introductions. We wish we could find out who you all were as well today, but since this is asynchronous, it's not as dynamic. Instead, maybe you could write in the chat who you are, and then we would love that because Amy and I are here with you live and we can read that. I will start off by telling you that I am Wendy, and you can read the slide if you would like to see some of my lovely titles, but I am most proud of the title of Mom. My son Kiernan is a senior in high school at El Camino Real High School in Woodland Hills, and yes, that is freaking me out a bit.
I cannot believe he's going to be in college next year, Wendy.
I know.
My name is Amy Gaines, and I've known Wendy since I was her student at CSUN like 20 years ago.
We were 5.
Okay, maybe fewer. As you can see on the slide, we've come a long way, and I too am proud to be a mom. My daughter Madeline is in 9th grade, and she's pretty awesome also.
She definitely is. And wait, we cannot forget to introduce our guest star today. I'm happy to say that Bennett from Simpact is joining us to help us really see what it's like to engage in some of these co-teaching high leverage practices. Bennett?
Hello, Dr. Murawski and Ms. Gaines. Nice to see you both today. And hello to all our participants, viewers, and colleagues joining us here today. My name is Bennett, and maybe, as you can tell, I am an avatar, and I work with Wendy and Amy through the CSUN Simpact Immersive Learning Program. I'm delighted that you are here today. Though I am able to take on many roles, and often I do as I work with, teachers, social workers, administrators, therapists, counselors, and others, today I will be taking on the role of a general education teacher. I look forward to seeing you all again shortly.
In the next 45 minutes, we want to accomplish a lot of things. It may seem like we're going fast, but the nice thing about asynchronous presentations is that you can always watch them again. So now is a good time to tell you that we are going to be providing you with a variety of resources, which will include QR codes at the end of the presentation, which will link you to a Padlet with even more resources and a copy of the presentation that we're doing today. Ultimately, then, what we plan to do today is to review some of the key terms, so we're all on the same proverbial page. Wendy, Bennett, and I will do some co-presenting for you, and we'll give you some examples of how HLPs and EBPs can be built into a co-taught class. And we'll also have some fun with Bennett, the avatar. He has a great personality, so that part will be easy.
Super fun. When we submitted our proposal to present today, we didn't know if we would be live or async. If live, we would have typically used this next section to be in parallel teaching and model parallel teaching as we review these key terms. However, since we can do that with you, let's just pretend we did. Amy will start us off with some terms you probably already know since you're at an inclusion conference, but it's best practice for us to review vocabulary anyway. So let's jump in.
Okay, so let's talk about inclusion. As Wendy said, you're all probably extremely familiar with what inclusion is. We are using a definition here that comes from the organization CASH, but there are so many great definitions out there. Too many sometimes, so it makes it difficult to all agree on one. Ultimately, though, we would say that inclusion is a philosophy. It's a belief system that all individuals have the right to be educated together and to have their unique needs and neurodevelopment profiles recognized and celebrated.
Absolutely. It is definitely a philosophy.
So how do we ensure inclusive practices in our schools? Like, that's the big question. We collaborate, and really collaboration is just playing nicely with others. We should have learned that back in preschool, but it is unfortunately amazing how difficult this action remains for some adults. But collaboration really is key to successful inclusion. Co-teaching is an application of collaboration, but there are certainly many ways to collaborate in schools that don't involve co-teaching. So co-teaching is a service delivery option that helps many students succeed in general education classes when that is their least restrictive environment. And as Wendy's definition shows, co-teaching takes more than mere collaboration, though. To be done well, 2 or more professional educators need to co-plan, co-instruct, and co-assess. Those are the pieces that aren't always in place when unwitting but well-intentioned school administrators merely place 2 teachers in the same room without the necessary professional development.
That's right. So now let's get to some terms that you may not be as familiar with, taken directly from a chapter that Amy and I wrote, and that will be published soon-ish. EBPs are essentially teaching methods or strategies that research has shown to work. There is an evidence base around it. And while Pinterest definitely gives us some fun ideas, love it, just being on Pinterest does not an EBP make. What if you're not sure if a strategy is an EBP? You can Google it. There are entire sites that are now devoted to identifying what an EBP is and what is just, well, let's say a teacher tip or a cool idea. And then what about research-based practices? It's the same as EBP. So evidence-based practice, research-based practice, there means there is evidence or research to show that this technique works. It's still important to look at the research, of course, because not every strategy works for every population. And as we all know, even strategies with tons of research to support them may not work for your specific student or students. But at least it gives you and your co-teacher a solid base to start from and something to talk about. Let's throw some more acronyms into the mix. Have you heard of HLPs? Yes, no, put it in the chat. If you think of EBPs as those concrete research-supported strategies that work in a classroom with students, think of HLPs as the way we implement the EBPs. So let's say you know of a reading strategy that works. What are the pedagogical ways that you can implement it? As Dr. James McCluskey and colleagues defined it, HLPs are a critical set of practices that can be learned, practiced, observed, improved upon, and generalized to improve student learning and behavior. So these are the things that we teach in our colleges of higher education. We can observe in student teachers, we can mentor in novice teachers, and we can give feedback to our co-teachers, get feedback from them. These are the skills that we want to employ because we know they make a difference in the outcomes for students. Obviously, that leads to Amy and I. HLPs and EBPs make sense together. Dr. Erica McCrae and colleagues also wrote that they are a promising pair and they can become powerful tools for improving student outcomes. So if educational researchers have identified the strategies that work with students most often and the techniques that make the most impact on students, why wouldn't we collaborate to do those things? Dr. Melissa Jenkins from the University of Mary Washington and I are actually working on a new book for a Norton anthology on inclusive practices. So be paying attention for that one. That's a whole anthology on inclusive practices. Our book is on the HLPs and co-teaching. And so I've pulled a visual that we're working on to share with you here. We have the high leverage practices from general education and special education. Then co-teachers can use those best practices to work together to implement the EBPs, remember, evidence-based practices, and specially designed instruction, or SDI, with their diverse inclusive class of students. Easy peasy, right? Well, we think so. But before we jump on our horses and ride off into the sunset, we should probably dive a little deeper into what these HLPs and EBPs might look like in the co-taught class, especially since that's what we promised you in the beginning. Amy?
So while there are many high leverage practices in both general education and special education fields, the Council for Exceptional Children, or CEC, as you may know, recently highlighted the four main overarching areas where all of the HLPs in special education fit. These are pretty much what education is all about: collaboration, assessment, social, emotional, and behavioral practices, and of course, instruction. In our short session today, we will provide some suggestions for embedding each of these four major high leverage practices into your co-teaching practices. We'll start with collaboration, which is also the focus of the chapter that Dr. Morosky and I recently wrote for a book scheduled to come out in 2022 called The Practical Guide to High Leverage Practices in Special Education, the purposeful how-to enhance classroom rigor. Wendy, did you say I did that? Like, I learned how to shamelessly plug our books. Yeah, I learned that from you.
I know, I'm so proud.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, but we should also mention that collaboration obviously includes far more than just co-teaching. There are so many ways for educators to collaborate in schools to help with inclusive practices. It's just that our focus today is co-teaching. So let's jump right in with an example, which is also from our chapter.
You are crushing these shameless plugs. Yep, well done, little Padawan.
But I'm out, yeah.
You have learned well. All right, so Amy, let's put this into practice since we are modeling co-teaching. Why don't you tell me an EBP you're aware of that requires collaboration, and we can think about what that might actually look like when we're co-teaching.
Okay, so what about reviewing past instruction? I'm certain that that is an evidence-based practice.
You are true, it is indeed. Unfortunately, I often see teachers simply just starting classes by having students sit at their desks and do 5 review problems or answer a couple questions. And it feels like it just sucks the life right out of the room and certainly doesn't engage students that way, even if it's more meant to be an important review. So what might we do to mix that up, given that there are 2 of us?
So like we could do something like station teaching, like where one of us could work with a group on a particularly difficult problem for like 5 minutes while the other co-teacher reviews maybe more general concepts. And then we could and we could maybe do like a third station, like an independent station where students might work at their desks to check the rest of their homework, which could work really well if we made a model answer available to those kids.
I love that. And if each station's only around 5 minutes long, and the students are rotating through each station, they're going to be done with the review in 15 minutes. So same amount of time, just a little more engaging. I love that. So what's another one? Let's do one more.
So just off the top of my head, I can think of like asking an open-ended question and then just observing what the students' responses are. Like that's got to be an educator EBP.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can even see us just using one teach, one support, like more strategically in that case. Like one of the teachers could be working on asking appropriate differentiated questions of students, maybe even throwing around the koosh ball. You know how I like to do that to help with engagement. And the other one could be taking notes on the clipboard as we walk around, right? Just identifying the type of question, the response, whether we're going to need additional reinforcement or enrichment. So excellent. That's another one. Pretty easy.
Okay, so Wendy, it's your turn to come up with an EBP.
I've already thought of one that we love in special education, using models for students. We can use realia, like hands-on materials, but we also might simply model our thinking or the steps we're taking.
Yeah, like a read-along. So that one is really easy to put into a co-teaching approach. Team teaching is really a phenomenal way to model and to role play and debate and to show students how we, like as adults, communicate. So in this situation, it would be cool for us to show the students how we attack problems differently, or how we may even have to have a different like response based on our own frame of reference or cultural backgrounds. Right. What's another one?
Well, since many students with disabilities need support for difficult material, know that using scaffolding is a definite EBP.
Yeah, yeah. And certainly scaffolding can be used for multiple purposes, like to help students academically, but even as supports for those who may need help with like their behavior or like social pragmatic skills.
Absolutely. So we could select alternative teaching for this EBP since it specifically allows for a large group and a small group.
Right. What? Yes. So far we've done 4 of the 5 co-teaching approaches that Friend and Cook first identified back like in the 80s. What's left?
One of my favorites, parallel teaching.
Okay, so I have an EBP for that one. What about checking for understanding?
Absolutely.
So like with that one, the co-teachers could divide the class in half to review for an upcoming test and then check for understanding with their smaller group. And then if they wanted to, they could each use Kahoot or like another game format, or they could review in a different way. And then the benefit of that is that having only half the class will certainly help them to see who is and isn't ready for the summative assessment.
Brilliant. We did it. 5 co-teaching approaches connected with 5 EBPs in under 5 minutes. We are rock stars.
Very humble rock stars, I have to add.
Super humble.
Super humble.
All right. So collaborating seems like a no-duh activity, and yet many educators struggle with it, as Amy said earlier. At CSUN and in many other school districts and with other universities, we use something called SIMPACT to actually practice our skills related to collaboration and related activities. Check out this quick clip from our resistant co-teacher scenario, wherein Bennett is our general education teacher, and I am a special education teacher practicing my communication and collaboration skills. So here we are practicing.
Thanks for meeting with me, Bennett. I know we were told by administration just a few days before school started that we would be co-teaching. And I just don't think we've had a chance to start off on the right track these past 2 weeks.
So, I mean, what do you want from me? You know, I let you be there as I'm teaching, even though, as far as I'm concerned, 1 teacher per room is plenty.
Really? You don't think that these days, with the incredible amount of diversity that we have in all of our classes, that a class would benefit from having 2 teachers?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it is crazy how different today's kids are. You know, it's not like years ago, you know, when we're just supposed to teach and, you know, you do the content and they're supposed to listen, take notes, pass tests. You know, now we're supposed to differentiate and whatever the heck that means.
We just found a place where I can be of value. Differentiation is actually one of my specialties.
It is?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, then. Fine. You pull those kids who don't get it and work with them, and I'll teach, you know, the normal ones.
Bennett, I'm getting the sense that maybe you haven't co-taught before. Is that accurate?
That's true.
Tell you what, how about I buy you a cup of coffee and I tell you a little bit more about what co-teaching might look like in our shared class. In addition to knowing a whole lot about differentiation, I am also an expert on universal design for learning and co-teaching and strategies that can help kids with and without disabilities do better in our shared content class. And I have a feeling that my expertise in strategies paired with your obvious content expertise could make for a really strong teaching team. What do you think?
Hey, if it's a grande hazelnut latte, I'm yours.
Deal.
Okay, so in that last little clip, we saw Wendy practicing her communication skills with Bennett, who was our SIMPACT avatar, and they were working on improving their collaboration. I have to give kudos to you, Wendy. There were times when I saw you take a deep breath and think about what you were going to say instead of just reacting to Bennett's words. And I was kind of on the edge of my seat at those moments. And those are skills that definitely take a lot of practice. So that was super impressive. So now to move on to the second of the 4 major HLP areas, which is assessment. We know that assessment is a key part of any instruction in class, and here we have highlighted a few of the subsection HLPs in special education related to assessment. Obviously, we know that educators need to use multiple sources of information when assessing students, and no one test does it all. We also need to take the data and communicate effectively with the stakeholders. And those stakeholders, they might be the co-teachers or families or special service providers like occupational therapists or speech language specialists or even administrators. And while assessment is a very broad topic, we're focusing here just on co-teaching. And so if you recall the definition of co-teaching, it includes co-planning, co-instructing, and co-assessing. And here are two resources we really like to help with co-assessing. The first is an article by Greg Conderman and Laura Hedin titled Purposeful Co-Assessment Practices for Co-Teachers. And the second one is by Kina Cornelius called Formative Assessment Made Easy. We've placed these fabulous QR codes with dinosaurs here for those of you who would like to scan and check them out now, but know that they're also part of the Padlet that we're going to be sharing with you at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, fantastic resources. I really like those. So let's check out another mini clip using our Simpact process for practicing skills. In this mini clip, we have Bennett, again, our general education teacher, and Amy gets to be the special education teacher. And we have a guest visitor, Madeline, a student in their shared co-taught class. Let's check it out.
Oh, man, I am seriously frustrated with one of my students, Amy. I mean, Madeline is refusing to show her steps on her math test, so I can't give her credit for the answers since I can't see where her mistakes are. Like I don't know where the errors are in her thinking. And how do I know that she didn't use a calculator? I mean, she's been in our class for 3 weeks. I've told her my expectations before every assignment, and she still refuses to follow the rules.
Okay, well, first, let's acknowledge that was a lot of I language. I can't give her credit. I've told her my expectations, my rules. What have we talked about related to that?
Man, you're so right. It's just hard to change a habit, but I'll try. And because it's our class and our rules, I need you to help me with this. What do we need to do?
Nice use of the we language. Okay, seriously, I hear how frustrated you are, but have you asked her why she's not showing her work?
No, but I don't think we should change our rules for one student. I mean, do you?
Okay. Do you remember how we talked about how fair does not always mean equal, and how we want to embrace both universal design and differentiation? So understanding her perspective may pave the way for a smoother school year for all three of us. She may be willing to meet us halfway if she feels heard and understood, and we may gain valuable insight into her needs along the way, which also may apply to some of the other students we have who don't always show their work. Why don't we just discuss it with her together?
Okay, I guess can't hurt. Let's give it a try. I've sent her a text to join us on here.
Yeah, you asked me to meet you?
Yeah, hey, Madeline. Miss Gaines and I wanted to have a conversation about what's going on with you and our co-taught math class. We've noticed that you don't show your work. And when you do your homework and tests, you're not really showing that. So I was just wondering why that is.
My hands really hurt when my fingers cramp up when I do all that writing. It also feels like such a waste of time since I can't do all of that work in my head.
Mr. Bennett, I just have a question. When Madeline does the work in her head, is she still able to answer the questions correctly?
Yeah, her accuracy is about typically really strong, almost always above 80%, and often even 90 or 100%. But if we don't see the steps, how do we know how you got the answers, or even if you're using, a calculator or not, how you got the right answers?
I always use a calculator. Just watch me in the classroom to see. Or when we're doing tests, I can just turn my camera down and you can see that I'm not using a calculator.
Okay, Listen, why don't we try a compromise? Instead of showing her work for all the problems, what if Madeline can show her work only for the last 3 problems and then she can do the rest of them in her head? But Madeline, listen, if your accuracy drops below 80%, that will tell us that you need more practice. So you will need to show your work for more of the problems. And Mr. Bennett, if you feel like we need more evidence that Madeline is approaching the problems correctly, maybe she can record her thought process using Flipgrid or Loom, or even just talking us through a few of her problems orally. What do we all think of that idea?
I would prefer to not show any of my work because it just seems like busy work, but I can do that.
Yeah, I'm willing to try this. I mean, listen, my main issue is making sure she's doing her own work and she's using the steps that will help her out, subsequent math classes. As we know, math builds on itself. So I just don't want Madeline or any of her students getting in bad math habits.
I love that. I hope you noticed how Amy was really practicing her collaboration skills as she was working with Bennett, but also how both teachers were able to listen to their student and recognize Madeline's unique neurodevelopmental profile. They're open to her demonstrating her learning through a different means of expression, which really ties into our belief in universal design for learning, or UDL. Let's continue with the third area of HLPs, social, emotional, and behavioral practices. And as much as we may like to focus on instruction when teaching, the field of education has empirically identified the real connection between addressing social emotional learning, called SEL, and outcomes for students. Note that 2 evidence-based practices that relate to this area are SEL programs and PBIS, which stands for Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. You may also find this in the literature as PBS, or Positive Behavior Supports. One of the reasons we want to emphasize a focus on SEL and PBIS is this wicked problem noted on the PowerPoint. Critically low engagement is a serious issue, and the pandemic has exacerbated it significantly. We as teachers need to recognize that and do whatever we can collaboratively to address this issue.
Yes, right. And as we note and have bolded here for you, the viewer, addressing all of these needs is incredibly difficult. And while co-teaching definitely doesn't solve the issues, it does provide additional supports, which benefits everybody. By co-teaching, these teachers can work together to identify students' needs, and then they can problem solve to see how they can best address them while also teaching the content. It's definitely a wicked problem in which 2 brains is better than 1.
Yeah, or even better than 2. 2 plus 2 equals 12, 3,
Yeah.
Whatever. It's not math. All right, let's look at another example where we try and connect an EBP within the HLP of SEL and behavioral practice with COT, or co-teaching. Just too many acronyms. But in this table, we are sharing those 2 EBPs, so the SEL programs and PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Supports. In the first, you'll notice that we're using station teaching to help students with SEL, but I want you to note how we're doing this with content as well. So for example, in station 1, where we might be conducting a mini lesson on self-identity, we could be reading Night and in English and asking students to share how they identify themselves culturally. We might be studying cells in biology and asking students to talk about nature versus nurture based on their identities and so on. In station 2, we have our students watching videos on tips for self-management. And for high school students, this might relate to studying and preparing for college. In station 3, we have one of the co-teachers leading a discussion related to responsible decision-making, which is a key area in SEL programs. That decision could be used in social studies to talk about decisions made in history or current events, decisions made by politicians. It could be used in science to connect developing hypotheses and making ethical decisions when experimenting with live subjects. And then in the fourth station, we have independent goal setting and doing a worksheet with models. Goals could be open to including personal goals, professional or school-related goals, or it could be specific to the class, like setting their own deadlines for a multi-step project. In this way, co-teachers can embed this SEL into the actual curriculum so that we're really enhancing what is learned, not making it feel like it's just an add-on. We've also provided an additional example on here of using alternative teaching with SEL to help with student behaviors for transitions. We're also giving 2 examples of co-teaching approaches to implement PBIS in your content classes. So modeling examples and non-examples of class behaviors like getting out of seat, interrupting when a peer's talking, etc. That can be discussed and we can demonstrate it through team teaching. It's lots of fun. Using parallel teaching, we could have one co-teacher go over classroom expectations while the other one is reviewing and discussing the good behavior game, teaching kids how that's going to play out throughout the semester. And then we just flip-flop the groups so that all the students will ultimately receive the same instruction, even though Amy and I as co-teachers only have to prepare our part. So bam, SEL and PBIS included in the co-taught class.
As you have probably guessed, it's time to see what this would look like in practice as Wendy and Bennett collaborate around SEL. Let's see.
I am seriously hating all the Zoom teaching, Wendy. The kids don't turn on their videos, they don't participate, they're not engaged. I feel like I'm done with them.
I know. Not being able to make that face-to-face connection is so hard, Bennett. I completely agree. But I'm not ready to give up yet.
Man, how do you stay so positive? If they don't care, why should we?
I guess I'm trying to remind myself that many of these kids have probably experienced a whole lot of trauma during this time. I know how stressful it has been for me, and I'm a fairly privileged, well-educated adult with a job and income, a support system. I'm food and housing secure, and yet so many of our kids don't have any of that. So I guess I just try and put that into perspective when I'm getting frustrated that maybe somebody hasn't done their homework or, they don't want to put their video on.
Good point. I know this whole pandemic has me pretty stressed out. I've lost a family member who wasn't vaccinated, and I find it really hard to concentrate on lesson planning when it feels like there just is so much going on outside the classroom.
Yeah.
So, yeah, point made. Well, what can we do about it?
I know that addressing students' social emotional learning is really key to helping them succeed academically as well. So what if we brainstorm some ways that we could help them feel comfortable sharing without putting them on the spot or making them feel embarrassed, like share what's going on with them?
I'm game for that. Especially if we can use some of those regrouping approaches like stations, or parallel that you've been teaching me so that we can, still keep a focus on content.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to do it. Let's brainstorm.
Wendy, I really like how Bennett is opening up to not only seeing you as an equal partner, but also embedding differentiation and SEL and other practices into your co-teaching environment. I have a feeling he's going to like the next HLP area, which is instruction.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you look at the slide here, we pulled out a few of the HLPs in the field of special education, which are actions that we have learned over time and through research that are, you guessed it, practices that make the most difference for our students, hence their rating as high leverage practices. These include scaffolding, using assistive technology, goal setting, teaching cognitive and metacognitive skills, using explicit and intensive instruction, and helping students learn how to generalize across time and across settings.
Great.
Back in 2011, in their book entitled Collaborate, Communicate, and Differentiate, Wendy and our dear friend, Dr. Sally Spencer, created the essential question of co-teaching. This is the question that administrators and co-teachers both should always come back to when assessing the effectiveness of their class. How is what the two co-teachers are doing together in the class both substantively different and better for kids than what one of them would be doing alone? This is really the crux of co-teaching. You might be a rock star on your own, and your partner may be as well, but what is it that is the value added when you're working together?
And I just really want us to spend just a moment thinking about this. So those of you who are co-teaching, really just reflect, what is it that happens when you guys are working together? And Amy, that word, everybody says it differently. So substantively, substantially, it's all over. So, but I really think we need to be different. We need to be better for kids. So again, this is one that we really want to reflect on. It's super important. All right, so now that we've decided that we are substantively different and better for kids together, we're going to just use the same format that Amy and I kept doing. And we've pulled 2 more evidence-based practices, EBPs, from the IRIS modules. If you don't know IRIS, you really need to look it up. In order to demonstrate how to connect these instructional EBPs with co-teaching practices. In the first one, we have explicit instruction combined with strategy instruction. And as you see, we're using station teaching again to demonstrate how co-teachers can maximize this EBP in their class. So educator 1 teaching a brand new content, it might be how to solve systems of equations, or the differences between similes and metaphors, or even introducing photosynthesis. The other co-teacher is teaching a brand new strategy, and a research-based one, remember. So it could be like SRSD, which is self-regulated strategy development. And that helps students take ownership of their own learning. Then in a third station, which could be independent or it could be run with a paraprofessional, students could be reviewing an activity, information from a previous lesson. Maybe they're doing a worksheet or playing a game, or like Kahoot, or pulling responses on Flipgrid or Padlet, any of these things.
Thanks, Wendy. Another example of connecting the HLP of instruction with an EBP and co-teaching is to look at the EBP of class-wide peer tutoring. Co-teachers could use the team teaching to model to their class what it looks like to provide positive peer tutoring supports and feedback. And then after the modeling, students can practice and co-teachers can circulate and just provide feedback to the kids in the class. By the way, if you are not familiar with the IRIS modules, we strongly recommend to each of you that you Google them, because it's an amazing site with tons of examples and resources, and that's for new teachers and veteran teachers as well.
Agreed. I love the IRIS modules. Super. Okay, time again to make our connection through a glimpse of co-teachers Bennett and Amy talking about how to improve their own co-teaching practices. Let's see.
Thanks for meeting with me after school today, Bennett. I thought it might be a nice idea for us to chat and reflect on how our first 6 weeks of co-teaching have gone.
No worries. It's a good idea. Oh, and thanks for getting me that cup of coffee. It's been a long day. I need me some caffeine. You know what I mean?
I know. DoorDash is on its way. I ordered us both Ventis. It's definitely been that kind of a week.
It has indeed. Though, man, I have to admit, Amy, I'm not sure I would have done as well if I didn't, have you there.
Really? Oh my gosh. Are you giving me a compliment, Bennett?
I am indeed. I meant, okay, I was probably reluctant with this whole co-teaching thing, but I'm really seeing the benefits. I like the strategies you're bringing in. The kids seem to really, be responding to both, having us both there. They ask questions. We're there for them. And honestly, I've just enjoyed having someone else to brainstorm the issues with.
That's definitely one of the best benefits of co-teaching. Seriously, this is exactly why I'm such a fan of co-teaching also. I find that I become a much better teacher. For example, even though I've co-taught in math before, I feel like I've learned so much content from you this year alone. And it's not just content, but also just great ways to teach the content.
Oh, man. This is, it's becoming a love fest. Awkward.
Listen, okay, enough of that. Let's just keep the focus on the students, right? I mean, that's what, like, we're here for the kids. So
Got it.
what do we like that we've been doing with them? Like, what's working, and what do you think we should change?
Yes. Okay. All right. No more fluffy feeling talk. Let's keep it strategic. Okay. Well, I was nervous about the small groups, but when we were on Zoom, I thought that breakout rooms worked well for getting them to communicate more. And then when we moved back to the classroom, I liked how we continued the small groups and stations. And, the students have remarked on many occasions, they're just like how much they like the stations. So I think that keeping those, yeah, that's a must. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I completely agree with you. Stations also help me, like as a special educator, to break down the content and to check for student understanding, and then see where we need to fill in the gaps. So it's good for all of us educators as well.
Nice.
Lovely. It's just another wonderful example of what practicing these important skills could look like. And Amy, it seemed like Bennett went a far way in 6 weeks.
He has definitely improved. It's incredible what it's all about relationship building, I think.
That's right. It's collaboration, baby. And today we've been focusing obviously on co-teaching with high leverage practices and evidence-based practices. We wanted to just use SIMPACT to show you how we can work on those skills as you're building them. And I am the director of SIMPACT at California State University, Northridge. So I also want to quickly mention that if you're interested in learning more about SIMPACT and its various applications, as you can see on the screen, we practice a whole lot of skills, which is just really helpful and feels like a safe space. And it's fun, right, Amy?
It was super fun. It was a very entertaining experience.
Yeah, it's super. And of course, it's building skills, so that's great. But you can check it out at csun.edu/SIMPACT.
So as we wrap up, Wendy, Bennett, and I want to leave you with a reminder. Even without the pandemic to deal with, today's classes are diverse and intense. Being able to use education research to help guide us in identifying evidence-based practices and then using what we know we can teach and learn through high leverage practices, it gives teachers focus and direction. And so knowing that we can't do it all alone, nor should we have to, it can help more teachers embrace co-teaching practices. And through it all, we simply need to play nicely with one another and keep collaborating.
Like going back to pre-K, we got to learn to play nicely with other adults.
But we forget as we grow up.
It's hard. We're used to going in, shutting our doors, and then doing whatever. But we're hoping that this presentation has really helped you recognize not only that co-teaching is just super great, but what we do together, we really need to be thinking about what it is we're doing, what's the content, how are we teaching it, etc. And so, go ahead, James.
Just the value added approach. Everything we do, when we do it together, we're kind of looking at it through the lens of making sure that what we do together increases the value for all the students above and beyond what we could do as individuals.
Absolutely. So here we also give you one more dinosaur QR code. Thank you to Amy for our dinosaur QR codes. And it links us to that Padlet that we mentioned that has lots of resources and stuff from today's presentation. So best of luck in your co-teaching journey to everyone. I think that's it for us, right, Ames?
That's it.
All right. Thank you all. Look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully at the next Inclusion Collaborative.